All right, we are back here on the podcast in the legal corner. Some of us did not think we'd be yet for a couple of weeks. I know the lockout's still going on, but we had a absolute bomb drop on us in the world of the NFL. Joining me today, our legal correspondent Phil Fraietta is here. Phil, how are you?
I'm doing well, Mike. That was a bomb is the right word. I was actually participating in a mediation today, which is essentially a group of lawyers meet and try and resolve a case. And this hit in the middle of the mediation, and obviously just took over. All the lawyers giving their opinions and the mediator giving his opinion. It was crazy, crazy news.
Absolutely. And in case you've been living under a rock for the past 48 hours or so, we had breaking news Tuesday afternoon in the NFL, most in the form of Brian Flores, who former coach of the Dolphins, has been interviewing a lot of places in this cycle. I believe he actually interviewed with the New Orleans Saints shortly before this lawsuit came out. He is suing the National Football League in a class action lawsuit, arguing that the systemic racist policies of the league are preventing the proper advancement of black coaches and black general managers and front office associates. So initial reaction, obviously, you said you were in a room with a bunch of lawyers. Like, how crazy was the thought process there about this suit coming out?
Absolute bombshell, absolute bombshell. And I could tell you, Mike, for the audience, I am a class action lawyer. That is what I do. I file class action lawsuits. So this is one of the segments that you had me on that I'm probably actually more qualified to talk about than the others. And the lawyers I'm with are class action lawyers too. Just an absolute bombshell, unbelievable lawsuit from a legal perspective, from a sports perspective, crazy as well. We'll get into all of it, but man, it's a just fun read of a complaint.
Oh, for sure. The complaint, I did read all 58 pages of it. I will link to it in the show notes if you want to take a look at it yourself. I'm going to use the screen share on the YouTube version here. So Phil and I are going to show you what's going on, some of the exhibits in the complaint. They're pretty wild. And before we go any further here, just as a layman, I'm not a versed in the law as you are. Can you explain the basic process of the class action lawsuit, what the goal is trying to be accomplished here?
Sure. So a class action lawsuit is it's a lawsuit, except that it's brought by one person or a small group of people on behalf of himself and a larger group of similarly situated people. So in this case, Brian Flores is suing on behalf of himself, but he's also suing on behalf of all the other African Americans who were wrongfully denied head coaching positions and other positions as alleged in the lawsuit.
Yeah, for sure. I want to also, before we go further into the weeds of the lawsuit here, I want to share the screen here. I have the tweet statement from Brian Flores up here. So I'm going to put this in the video right now. And this is multiple outlets from Bleacher Report. The statement Brian Flores said, "Guys gifted me with a special talent to coach the game of football, but the need for change is bigger than my personal goals. In making the decision to file the class action complaint today, I understand that I may be risking coaching the game that I love and that has done so much for my family and me. My sincere hope is that by standing up against systemic racism in the NFL, others will join to ensure that positive change is made for generations to come." And I think in terms of that, Phil, I mean, he's right. He could very well be blackballed for doing this lawsuit and never work in the league again. But I fully respect Brian Flores doing it. So what he is standing for is much more important than his salary or his family could be like if he gets another head coaching job.
So I alluded to the sports implications, and that's one of the things I meant. Brian Flores is likely never going to coach in the NFL again now that he did this. I think he understands that from that statement, which, by the way, would be illegal to blackmail him from the league, as we learned from the Colin Kaepernick situation. But let's face reality. That's probably what's going to happen. So I think that Flores understands that, and you're right. What he did is it's a selfless act. We oftentimes as lawyers, a lot of times I deal with clients who say, I don't really want to put my name on that kind of a lawsuit because there are things that are obviously far less of a bombshell than this. So that was a big. Flores really stepped up to do this.
Yeah, he really did. And I also want to pull up real quick the NFL response to this lawsuit. And I've seen a couple of tweets on it. I'm going to pull up one that I saw from, I believe it was Assets was retweeted. This is from Peter King, and then he subtweeted the Field Yates tweet, and this is what the league had to say in response to the lawsuit. I'm not going to comment on simply the wording of it. I'm going to ask you your legal opinion on how the league handled their response here. This is from the NFL. The NFL and our clubs are deeply committed to ensuring equitable employment practices and continue to make progress in providing equitable opportunities throughout our organizations. Diversity is core to everything we do. There are a few issues on which our clubs and our internal leadership team spend more time. We'll defend against these claims, which are without merit. I do feel like that's a very, very strongly worded response to the complaints from Brian Flores.
Yeah, that's I disagree with you a little bit there. That's kind of just par for the course when you sue these big companies. They have PR people who come out with these fluffy statements about how, you know, we really are committed, but your lawsuit has no merit. That's what that reads like to me. As far from a legal perspective, it's not going to matter whatsoever.
Yeah, basically, it's just your standard. Okay, here's our form letter response to this lawsuit, and we better just gonna throw out here say, hey, this means nothing to us. Like we disagree entirely with what the premise is.
Yeah, Mike, I could tell you that I've filed well over probably 3, 4, maybe even 500 lawsuits in my career at this point. You know how many the defendant said had merit?
Zero. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just par for the course.
It is par for the course. And I want to dive more into this complaint here. And there are a lot of bombshells in here. I'm going to start off with the thing that starts it off here. I mean, obviously, the top of the lawsuit here, there's a quote here from the lawsuit referencing text messages. It says, quote, sorry, I fucked this up. I double checked and misread the text. I think they're named Brian Dayball. I'm sorry about that, BB. This is Bill Belichick informing plaintiff Brian Flores 3 days before the interview with the New York Giants that Brian Dayball had already been selected for the job. And you were also a Giant fan. You were following this process here of the Brian Flores, Brian Dayball discussion here. Who's to get hired? We ended up with Dayball getting introduced earlier this week. So now we see this. So interesting that like this is sort of our main entry into the lawsuit.
Yeah, it's a very interesting way to start a complaint. So before I start commenting more on the complaint itself, I do want to put something out there kind of as a disclaimer. I have litigated against the plaintiff's lawyers in this case. I know them. And so I kind of want to reserve my punches a little bit. I don't want to criticize them. I think they're excellent lawyers and they do a great job for their clients.
Yeah.
This is a strange way to start a complaint. Typically, you would not put something like this. This is more something that you see in an academic article, but it's powerful to read it because that's bad to run a sham interview like they're alleging is bad. That's good evidence for the plaintiff. The Giants look absolutely horrible here if that's true, and it begs the question. You mentioned that I'm a Giants fan, so I don't want to go too far into the football aspect of it, but why are the Giants still involving Bill Belichick in their hiring decisions? I thought we moved away from involving Bill Belichick, but obviously not. They're obviously making sure that he knows what they're doing before they do it.
Oh, they absolutely are. I do think it was very interesting to see this. I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to share the screen again. We did get actual in the complaint. We had a lot of good visual aids in the complaint. We have the actual screenshots of what purported to be text messages between Bill Belichick and Brian Flores, and I ended up here now. And then you see this thread here where from Bill Belichick to Brian Flores. Sounds like you have landed. Congrats, Flores. You hear something I didn't hear. Giants, bunch of question marks, exclamation points. I interviewed on Thursday. I think I have a good shot at it. Bill Belichick says, got it. You're from Buffalo and NYG. You are their guy. Hope it works out if you want it to. Flores, that's definitely what I want. I hope you're right, coach. Thank you. Then he says a little later, coach, you talking to Brian Flores or Brian Dayball? Just making sure. Then you get the reading from the top there that we mentioned before. So having these text messages in here is definitely another sort of interesting article I did not think we'd see in a complaint.
It's the best evidence that's in this entire complaint. Again, the fact that Bill Belichick knew that this was a sham interview looks really bad for the NFL and particularly for the New York Giants. Why are they telling Bill Belichick that they're going to have a sham interview with Brian Flores? That just doesn't look good. obviously the investigation will determine whether or not these are truthful text messages, if they're fabricated or anything like that. But they look bad for the Giants and the league.
Yeah, I also want to bring up a point that somebody asked me offline earlier. I'm not going to name names here, but they asked in terms of like the Giants process here. I know the Rooney Rule basically says now, and that's sort of one of the controversial points of this lawsuit is like that the Rooney Rule is not being treated properly to actually promote the career growth of black coaches in the league. And it says the current Rooney Rule is you're supposed to interview two candidates outside your organization who are minorities to be a head coach. And the Giants interviewed Patrick Graham, was an internal candidate. They interviewed Leslie Frazier. Flores was the third minority candidate they interviewed, and he was technically after that. So you see the league at all trying to argue that the Giants did satisfy the rule, even though it does look bad that you have these text messages.
Yeah, look, the league will certainly argue that. And the problem that the league has here, and Mike, you know this, people who have criticized the Rooney Rule over the year have criticized it for this exact reason. They've argued that the end result is that minority head coaching candidates get sham interviews, but nobody's ever been able to prove it. And now Brian Flores has a text message that seems to prove it, that he got a sham interview by the New York Giants. So it looks bad for the league that it appears that this Rooney Rule is nothing more than, just really
Inconvenience.
trying to pull wool over your eyes,
Yeah.
make you think that we're doing something, but we're not. We're just running some sham interview of a guy and moving on.
Yeah, there's some other allegations here that, like, at this point are a lot of like he said, where we're gonna get some of those, and obviously there are gonna be questions where we can get these owners or executives into like court. In this case, that's not I'm gonna forget to touch on you later on here, but I think the Giant one is the most interesting one because this is the only one in here where they actually have like direct proof that something fishy went on here. So I think that's probably the most, like you said, it's the most compelling point in their case thus far.
Absolutely. It's what jumped out to me when I read the complaint. I was like, oh my God. Like typically in a employment type case, let's divorce this from the NFL, right? Let's just talk about an employment lawsuit. If I was applying for a job at a company and I didn't get the job, and I determined that I didn't get the job for whatever reason, I'm whatever race, religion, gender, etc. How often do you have actual proof that you were given a sham interview, that they picked somebody before you even got there? The answer is never. You would never know. And I'm sure that happens in companies every day. I'm sure that there's companies who invite 5 guys to interview for the same job. They love guy number 1. They're sure they're going to hire him. They just interview the other 4 guys just to be polite. But the other 4 guys would never know. In this case, somebody knows because Bill Belichick told him. It's a really, really mind-blowing allegation that's supported by evidence, it seems like, and it's to me the best piece of evidence. It's the whole bread and butter of this lawsuit.
Yeah, I want to touch on another piece of the lawsuit before we go into specifics about some of the other teams listed here. I'm going to go back to the top of the lawsuit again on the YouTube versions. Again, you can check it out on my YouTube channel, Mike Phillips on YouTube, for more on this. So the way this is said here is that I'm reading the actual court filing. United States District Court, Southern District of New York. Brian Flores is a class representative on behalf of himself and all those similarly situated as the plaintiff. The National Football League, New York Football Giants Inc., Miami Dolphins Ltd., Denver Broncos, and John Doe teams 1 through 29. So those 3 teams, the Giants, the Broncos, and the Dolphins, are named. John Doe teams 1 through 29, you read further in the piece, are the rest of the teams in the league who the lawsuit claims like are following like policies that are systemically racist in their hiring practices. And we'll dive more into that. I think I read on Twitter, I want to get your take on this. I think the fact that all these teams are listed here is not directly like impacting Flores, but it's potential class action like defendants here, I think opens the process of discovery to the defense team, to the plaintiff's team. And I think it's something the NFL will want to avoid at all costs.
Yeah. So the reason that they do that is Flores himself is able to make allegations against the Giants, the Dolphins, and the Broncos. He's not able to make allegations against the other 29 teams. But he has reason to believe that the other 29 teams are involved in this conspiracy, as he alleges it. So you call them does, you do discovery, and you see if in the discovery evidence comes out that, yeah, the Jets, for instance, they were in on it. They knew what was going on, and they were part of the gentleman's club, etc. So that's what the does are about.
Yeah, and I think the problem here, the NFL think is definitely going to want to avoid here. This is why I think this trial could be such a like bombshell for the league, even beyond the implications of what Flores could gain if he wins the lawsuit. And I'm not going to even speculate on what this lawsuit could look like. It's the fact that the NFL could have stuff dug up in discovery and end up on public record. They want no part of it. When we speculated this back when we had the John Gruden email situation, and who knows other correspondences could like implicate the league on things that look very, very publicly.
Absolutely, absolutely. The NFL is going to be bringing as many motions as they can to seal the case, keep it confidential. But I could tell you, as somebody who I practice in the Southern District of New York most of the time, the judges on that court do not like confidentiality provisions. They are not in favor of it. They believe that the litigation process should be open to the taxpayers, because ultimately the taxpayers are what support the courts. And that's going to be a tough motion for the NFL.
Yeah, I want to get to a couple of the other things that
and let me add one more thing here, Mike. The plaintiff's lawyers in this case, the Wigdor firm, they use media to their advantage. They are not a law firm who is shy about going to the press. So I would expect the Wigdor firm to be going to the press, giving interviews within the bounds of the rules, of course. But if there's groundbreaking information, they'll let the press know about it.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, like we are recording on Tuesday night, the next morning here, Wednesday, so be out. This is going to happen before the podcast is out here, but Brian Flores and his legal team are doing an exclusive interview with CBS News this morning at 7 a.m. So they're going to be on there starting their rounds about the case.
Not surprised. That's the law firm's play. That's their MO.
Yeah, I also want to add here that the use of visual aids throughout this this briefing this complaint are very interesting, and I think these are designed for potential jurors. I don't know. I'm going to ask your opinion as a lawyer here. Like, we have graphics in here, for example, where in the complaint we're showing like these are the current head coaches or like lead football people right now, and you can see like they make it very clear like there is one black man in that group. And there are only two other minorities in that group. You go down to the GM section here. There's 6 black men in the group. And then you go to the owners section, which is the last one, 0.
So the visuals are there. You're right. They're partially there for the jury who may one day get a copy of the complaint. But they're more so there for even just the judge, because judges are human beings. And visuals help. I do the same thing in my legal work. I put visuals in legal filings all the time, whether it be photographs or charts or things like that. They help you read, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. That's the saying, right? And it's true. It's definitely true.
It absolutely is true. I mean, this is something that they talk about in the media for a while. It's like, in a league where 70% of the players are black and a lot of money, and the complaint basically compares the league to basically a plantation style where the owners are profiting off of the black players. I know I'm not going to get into all of that stuff specifically because it's not my place to get into how they see what's going on there, because obviously I'm not living in a black person's skin or their experiences. I'm going to say that this is like, you see the picture. You see that there's only one black man in the lineup of head coaches, and that's a problem when you have a league that's that composed of African American players.
Yeah, absolutely. The pictures speak 1,000 words. That's the bottom line there. You look at that picture, and you got to at least ask yourself why. Why is that? It's a hard one, and something that they left out that I would have included, and maybe it's an allegation in the complaint and I missed it, but my understanding is that when you talk about assistant coaches, I actually think that most of the assistant coaches are minorities. So why is it that they can only be assistant coaches and they're not head coaches? It certainly makes you at least think about it.
Yeah, it certainly does. And there is a point in the article that reference like how many blacks are in positions such as offensive coordinator, quarterback coach, defensive coordinator. Numbers are not very high there either.
No. I think you go down to the lower level assistant coaches.
Yeah.
Then you start talking about more minority coaches. That's my understanding.
That's the way they phrase it in the complaint. I want to touch on a couple of the other teams referenced here. I want to go to Flores' former team, the Miami Dolphins, and these are allegations from Flores. We don't have any like corresponding evidence like the text messages we had with Bill Belichick, and this is from the lawsuit. The Dolphins owner, Stephen Ross, was unhappy with his performance, not because it was unperforming. To the contrary, Mr. Ross wanted Mr. Flores to quote unquote tank the season to put the team in position to secure the first pick in the draft. It's 2019 they're talking about. Indeed, during the 2019 season, Mr. Ross told Mr. Flores they'd pay him $100,000 for each game lost that year. Then, when the Dolphins started winning games, due in small part to Mr. Flores' coaching, Mr. Flores told the team's general manager, Chris Greer, that Steve, quote unquote, was mad, quote unquote. Mr. Flores' success in winning games that year was quote unquote, compromising draft position, close quotes. And to me, again, this is an allegation. We don't really have any proof of this actually happening apart from Flores' word on it. This is something in a age where there is legalized gambling and game fixing laws. This seems like something that the FBI might be very interested in.
So yes, from a legal perspective, as far as this lawsuit, this isn't all that important, but this is in there for a reason. This is in there because, like you said, this is something that's going to get the FBI's attention, and this is something that the NFL is going to run and hide from. Because Mike, when I was in law school, I took a course on, it was called Sports in the Law, and it was actually taught by somebody who was a former high up person in the NFL's general counsel office, and he explained in the course that there is nothing more important to professional sports leagues than protecting what's called the integrity of the game and making sure that fans know that every game is fair, the teams are trying to win, and it's not professional wrestling. It's not scripted. But if you have a situation where your owner is paying you extra money to lose so that you can get a better draft pick, that is a debacle. It's an absolute debacle. Like you said, especially with the gamblers being involved, who knows if that's going on behind the scenes. Can't have that. You cannot have that. I think that's a big deal for the league. It's certainly emboldens. It's a big deal for labor negotiations too, because that's always a labor issue. Is, are you tanking on purpose to get it? That's a disaster. That allegation is a disaster.
Yeah, and like I mean, obviously Flores did not accept that team when we talked about it at the time. We started joking like, oh, they're tanking, they're trying to make everybody a value, they're trying to get number one pick, and now we have an allegation saying, hey, like he was not only tanking to get the number one pick, he was offering his head coach $100,000 to intentionally lose football games. That's a big deal.
It's the biggest deal you could have. If it's true, Stephen Ross needs to be removed as the owner and banned from the NFL for life, if that's true.
Yeah, it's true. And now let's get to the Bronco one, which is not the same scale as the other two, but it's more of it's another one of these sham interviews. I'm going to go down to section 160 of the complaint here. It's his prior sham interview with the Denver Broncos. Incredibly, because they put this after the Giants section. This was not Mr. Flores' first sham interview that was held only in an effort to comply with the Rooney Rule. Indeed, in 2019, Mr. Flores scheduled an interview with the Denver Broncos. However, the Broncos' then general manager, John Elway, president and chief executive officer, Mr. Ellis, and others show up an hour late to the interview. They look completely disheveled. It was obvious they had been drinking heavily the night before. The script of the substance of the interview, Mr. Flores interviewed only because of the Rooney Rule. The Broncos never had any intention to consider him as a legitimate candidate for the job. Shortly thereafter, Vic Fangio, a white man, was hired to be the head coach of the Broncos. So I think this one, I don't know if you could speak to this as a lawyer. It sounds like, again, allegations, but this is more of we're embarrassing the NFL here by including this in the lawsuit.
Yeah, it's a little of both. It's a little of both. There's some, we're trying to embarrass the NFL, but you know what? It's an allegation, and there are people who can verify whether or not that's true. And Brian Flores is one of those people. So if that's what he says happened, he gets there's a presumption of truth unless it can be proven otherwise. So Brian Flores says that happened. Is that enough to win his lawsuit? No, but it's evidence. The testimony of Brian Flores is evidence in a legal proceeding.
It is definitely evidence in the legal proceeding. And I think the other thing, I'm not going to go through the visuals on this because there's way too many slides to go through, but they do a good job of breaking down the league's troubled history with race in the past, going all the way back to the segregation of the league, George Preston Marshall of the Washington franchise, basically making efforts to ban blacks from the league. We had the perils of the Rooney Rule in the past, and how they go through a lot of qualified candidates who had trouble getting interviews, like Eric Bieniemy, Terrell Austin. All their cases are listed in there, and they definitely go back to John Gruden again. They cite the emails saying, the league knew that John Gruden was a racist, had like all these terrible qualities, yet he was a preferred hire on the circuit for about a decade before he came back to the Raiders. So it's sort of furthering I think, a good job here by the lawyers, including this in there, in my opinion.
Absolutely. It provides color. It provides color. And when you file a lawsuit like this, it's going to be in the news. So you need to include stuff like that.
Yeah, they do include stuff like that. And obviously, my next question here is sort of like, what is the goal here from Flores? Obviously, you read the thing. So, like, what recourse is he seeking through this lawsuit?
Well, he's seeking money damages. That's what the lawsuit claims he's seeking. But I think what he's really seeking here is to put the league on notice and put the teams on notice that we as minority coaching candidates are not going to take this anymore. We feel like we're not being treated fairly, and we want a fair shake, and we want some jobs. That's what I read it as. So from a legal proceeding, yeah, if he wins the lawsuit, he gets money. But I don't think he just wants money. I think he wants more.
Yeah, I'm trying to find. There's a place listed in the in the complaint that says specifically what he was seeking.
It should be called the prayer for relief. It's usually at the end of the complaint.
Yeah, I got to scroll down. That was just a lot of articles in the complaint. I'm going to keep looking into that. And I also will say here,
I'm going to see if I can pull it up on my screen here, but it's normally right before the signature blocks, all the way at the end.
I'm going to keep going down here. It might be after the pictures here. While we're doing that, I also want to mention here, I do think in terms of what's going on here, I'm sure this hiring cycle definitely expedited the process of the lawsuit for Brian Flores, because this is a cycle right now where we have 9 head coaching openings. As of recording right now, 5 have been filled, and 5 have been filled by Caucasian candidates. And the ones that are still open right now, the Vikings down to either Giants as coordinator Patrick Graham, who is black, and Jim Harbaugh, with the tea leaf seems indicating they're leaning towards Harbaugh, taking prime away from Michigan. We have the Houston Texans apparently want to give Josh McCown the head coaching job, even though he's never coached in his life and he just came off the field as an NFL quarterback. The Jaguars are the only one linked to a black candidate really right now, because they were interviewing Byron Leftwich, although that's sort of been in limbo for a while, looking at more candidates. The Dolphins, talking to Mike McDaniel, the 49er offensive coordinator of the team, just fired Flores. And the Saints, obviously, still in the middle of their search for Sean Payton, though there's been some tea leaves that Dennis Allen may end up getting that job at the end. But you look at that cycle, especially if Josh McCown does the Texans job, that's another one that the league would be horrified if that's going on in the midst of this lawsuit.
Yes, and yes, I agree with that. But the problem that you end up having here, Mike, is that, and this is where I think the lawsuit is ultimately going to struggle on a class-wide basis. These head coaching candidates are different in their qualities and in their qualifications. So, for instance, there's an allegation in this lawsuit that talks about how in 2004, the New York Giants hired Tom Coughlin over Romeo Crennel and Lovie Smith. Well, would anybody who's a football fan say that was a bad decision? I think that was a great decision. That's probably the best decision the Giants have made. That's probably the last good decision they ever made, was hiring Tom Coughlin and then drafting Eli Manning. So I don't know. It's hard in that, right? Now, I understand that Romeo Crennel and Lovie Smith are minority candidates, but in my opinion, and I think most football fans would agree with me, Tom Coughlin's a better coach than those guys. So how do I know that Josh McCown's not the next great coach? I don't know that.
Yeah, you could make that argument for sure. I think the issue they're having is that, like, you have guys in the league who have paid their dues and been assistants for a long time, like Eric Bieniemy, like Terrell Austin,
Same
like
thing applies for them though, Mike. How do I know Eric Bieniemy's not a great coach? I get that. Maybe he's the next great coach. I don't know.
yeah, well, there's
But
yeah,
that's what's hard about these lawsuits. You don't know who's a good coach until you hire the guy.
yeah, and their complaint I think is mostly that this guy's not getting hired. Whereas like if you're Nick Sirianni, you're a coordinator for 1 year, or if you're one of the guys who hangs out on Sean McVay's staff for a year, you're getting a fast track to a job. Where these guys are in the league for a long time and doing good at their jobs, they're just not getting the opportunities.
That's true too, but let's play devil's advocate there. Do you think the Bengals regret hiring Zach Taylor from Sean McVay's staff?
Not right now, they don't.
No, they probably say, well, you know what, we made the right decision. This guy's great. We're in the Super Bowl. So okay. It's a hard one. It's hard. It's a very difficult. You know that. Any football fan knows that. Hiring a head coach is a very difficult thing to do.
Okay. I also found what I was looking for. It's a section 23. I'm going to share the screen here in terms of what he's looking for. So this was earlier in the prayer relief. And I knew I'd seen
the prayers. I found it too. The prayers down on page 56.
Yeah, I'm on page 8. So here's what's going on right there. So among the other relief.
So he's seeking injunctive relief. All right. He wants
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different injunctive relief things that he wants. So he's seeking that in addition to monetary damages.
Aside from the monetary damage, which is down at the bottom, the prayer relief you mentioned here, he's seeking the following injunctive relief: increase the influence of Black individuals in hiring and termination decisions for general manager, head coach, and offensive defensive coordinator positions. Ensure diversity of ownership by creating and funding a committee dedicated to sourcing Black investors take majority ownership stakes in NFL teams. Ensure diversity of decision making by permitting select Black players and coaches to participate in the interviewing process for general manager, head coach, and offensive defensive coordinator positions. Increase the objectivity of hiring and termination decisions for general manager, head coach, and offensive and defensive coordinator positions. Require NFL teams to reduce to writing the rationale for hiring and termination decisions, including a full explanation of the basis for any subjective influences, for example, trust, personality, interview performance, etc. Require NFL teams to consider side-by-side comparisons of objective criteria such as past performance, experience, and objective qualifications. Increase number of Black offensive and defensive coordinators. Create fund a training program for lower-level Black coaches who demonstrate aptitude for coaching and interest in advancing a coordinator position. Incentivize the hiring and retention of Black general managers, head coaches, and offensive and defensive coordinators through monetary, draft, and or other compensations such as additional salary cap space. And complete transparency with respect to pay for all general managers, head coaches, and offensive defensive coordinators. So he basically wants to completely overhaul the re-rule process and get rid of these potential sham interviews and actually give these guys more of a ladder to potentially grow their
career. So look, unlikely that stuff's actually going to happen in full. But what ends up happening in these lawsuits is that if and when they settle, the parties can agree on some sort of injunctive relief that they'll implement. So it'll be some mild version of that if this lawsuit's successful.
All right. So right now, I feel like we're good. Like, what do you like? I know this is again pure speculation because this is only just filed today. Like, and it's gonna be, I'm sure, a bit between discovery and the motions and all of that. So, like, how long do you think this trial could potentially last?
Well, I don't think this lawsuit ever gets to trial. It'll probably settle out of court before then, but it'll be at least a year and a half, 2 years before it gets to trial if it does. The class action lawsuits have various steps. So the first thing that's going to happen here is the NFL is going to respond to this complaint when they're going to do so with the motion to dismiss. They're going to seek to dismiss the complaint. And they're going to say that the case should be put on ice while that motion's adjudicated. The plaintiffs are going to oppose that. They're going to say the case should move forward. Depends who the judge is. As last I saw, they haven't got a judge yet. That's assigned at random. So some judges are very much in favor of staying cases, others aren't. So it depends who the judge is, whether or not the case gets stayed up at that point. The motion will get decided. I think they'll probably prevail. The plaintiffs will probably prevail and keep the case alive, at least in part. And then you'll get into the discovery process, and then the case will settle, I think. But if it doesn't, you complete discovery. And then once discovery is completed, you have what's called the class certification stage. So you can't just bring a lawsuit as a class action. You can bring a lawsuit and say you're going to seek class certification, but you need to then make a motion to the court. And the court has to determine whether the case qualifies for class action status. And there's a variety of factors that the court has to consider. It's developed in the rules and the case law. The court, and you need to make an evidentiary showing that you can satisfy all those factors. So that briefing process will happen. And then if they prevail on that and the class is certified, the NFL does two things. One, they take an immediate appeal to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Second Circuit gets to decide whether or not they want the appeal or not. And two, they move for summary judgment. And summary judgment is basically a judge, here are all the facts. No reasonable juror could possibly find that we did anything illegal. You should dismiss the case. And then, and only then, if they survive all of that, does the case go to trial. And this is why most lawsuits, and especially most class action lawsuits, settle, because that is a lot of time, a lot of risk, and a lot of money to pay lawyers.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely going on. I do feel like also, I feel like a secondary goal here, apart from getting into discovery, I think is going to be the first objective here. Is I think just again, the negative PR the league's going to take for having this lawsuit hanging over their head. I think that's going to be a big factor. I think it's being calculated by the plaintiffs. I'm completely speculating. I have no inside knowledge as you're not working on this legal case, but sort of creating pressure on the league to sort of overhaul their own policies proactively to try and get this lawsuit settled, get out of the courts.
Yeah, I think there's part of that, sure. And there's a part of that in any lawsuit like this, whether it be a bombshell sexual harassment suit. There's public pressure to just make the case go away from a PR perspective. So that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think
the problem, but Mike, let me add one thing. The problem that the NFL has here, though, most lawsuits you can make go away with money. I don't think this lawsuit goes away with money. I think Brian Flores wants some sort of meaningful change in addition to money. And that's harder.
Yeah, I think that's the difference here. It's not like Brian Flores is sitting there saying like, okay, give me X number of dollars. I will take my bowl and go home and not worry about working again and get rid of this lawsuit. I think he is actually taking the noblest pursuit, as I said at the top of the segment here, is that he is looking to help the future generations of African-American coaches have a better chance of advancing their own careers. And that is not something you can write a dollar sign in front of.
That's correct. And those cases become more difficult to resolve.
Yes. It would take, and I think this is something that it depends on. I know the league has said for years, like we care about diversity. They put slogans on helmets, they put slogans on the fields, but the actions have not lived up to the words.
No, and I think they actually point that out in the complaint too. That that it's nice that the NFL lets the players wear some slogans on their helmets, but that's not meaningful.
No, it's not meaningful, and I think that's a good place to leave it here. I think we kind of dove into all the interesting things of this lawsuit. We'll keep track of this as it goes forward, and I'm sure we'll be back again, Phil, soon, because these owners of the players in baseball also cannot get their acts together.
No, I'm surprised. That's something that you and I have talked about on this podcast for about 2 years now. So we're not totally shocked that this happened, but I thought they'd be a lot closer to a deal now. I'm starting to get worried that we're going to miss games.
Yeah, as of right now, we're again same day. This actually happened before the Flores lawsuit dropped here, that the owners and the players met again. And again, it feels like it's sort of a repeat of what's going on here with the pandemic negotiations back from 2020, where it feels like the owners are just sitting here saying, okay, this is our only number. We're not moving off it whatsoever. And the players are trying to come up with solutions and the owner's not budging whatsoever.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's getting concerning. And I'm sure I'll be back to talk about it in a few weeks, and I'll keep my eyes on this Flores lawsuit, and happy to jump on anytime anything develops to talk about it.
Yeah, I also going to do one more screen share in terms of timeline just to keep track of. I'm sure we're going to be back on after the Super Bowl, or if by some miracle they have a deal before this, which is not going to happen. There's no shot of this.
No, there's no shot.
So there's a good article on ESPN from Jesse Ryers with some timelines here. So these are what days we have to worry about stuff being pushed back. So pitchers and catcher is supposed to be 2 days out of the Super Bowl. If you don't have a deal by February 8th, start worrying. So, and Jeff Passan said today, spring training is getting delayed. So this one, I think we're blowing best.
Yeah, I'm worried, Mike. I'm worried that we're going to end up with a shortened season again.
Yeah, I'll keep going here. February 26th, spring training games begin. The date on this one is February 19th. Again, I could see them pushing past this date too. I feel like the owners are very dug in at this point.
it's based on the reporting, it seems that way.
So I think the owners are trying to call the players bluff and say, you want real change. I believe Evan Drellich from the Athletic has said this before, is that they're willing to sacrifice games.
It's concerning.
Yeah. And this is the big one here. March 31st, opening day. The deadline here, March 3rd. I think that's when you really have to be nervous here, because we've learned from the
if March 3rd comes and goes, then we're getting a shortened season.
Yeah, because we learned from summer camp a couple of years ago that 2 weeks is not enough time to get ready for the season. So the players are going to need at least 3.5 to get ready. So if we're not getting close to a deal by that point, and again, we'll see if this is, I think this is the deadline you're circling here on the calendar, is sort of, okay, on the 3rd, if we are not close, we have big issues.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right, Phil, thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Like I said, any material changes in that Flores suit, I'm happy to jump on.